And good morning on this fine Tuesday. How's everybody doing out there today? It's good to see you. Hi, Angel. Hi, Nicole. Hi, Sandra. Uh, how's my sound? Can I get a quick sound check? Can everyone hear me well enough? I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. We are now in week 3 of a 15-week course. So while we are definitely not at the halfway point, we have gotten a good start and we are off to a great semester. How's everybody doing? Okay, sound is fine, loud and clear. Good morning, Miso. Good to you. Okay, hello, Gabriella. Good to see you as well. Eli, thanks. All right, fantastic. I've had a couple of people say that they think the sound is a little bit soft, but when I go listen to the recordings, the sound is fine to me. So I'm just going to assume it's a user error on their end. Okay. Don't forget, we have a webinar, optional webinar tonight at 8 p.m. And webinar on Thursday at 7 p.m. as well. We're going to be talking about consciousness this week, and we're going to be talking about what it means to be in a state of flow. Okay. Hello, Johanna. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Sarah King, great to see you as well. Okay, fantastic. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? All right, I see Amin's in the house. Thanks, Amin. So this week we're talking about chapter 3. Your experimental psychologist, that subfield, is probably going to be one of the fields that's interested in the idea of consciousness. So when we talk about the different subfields of psychology, you might want to check out experimental psychology if you like what we talk about this week. What we're going to talk about today is what it means to be conscious. It's actually a more difficult definition and explanation than you might think. We're going to talk about a model of consciousness called the global workspace model of consciousness. We're going to talk a brief bit about split brain patience and what that means for consciousness. And then we're going to talk about some altered states of consciousness. On Thursday, we are going to be talking about sleeping and dreaming because sleep is one of the major changes in consciousness that human beings go through every day. So, we're going to be talking about that as well. Good morning, Amin. Good morning, Cosette. Wow, we've got a great audience in here today. You know, I'd like to thank everybody that comes to the live broadcast. It really means a lot to me to have you in the class and listening and participating. And I won't forget this. I promise. I've got all of your backs. Okay. I appreciate you coming to see me. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about consciousness. You know, consciousness is one of those slippery mental constructs that's hard to define, to measure, or even define. If you'll remember from week 1, I talked about William James. His theory on consciousness was that it was a stream, something you could never measure twice. He coined the term stream of consciousness to explain how impossible it would be to measure such a free flowing thing. Now, there is no real universal agreement on what consciousness is. That's kind of crazy, but it's sort of difficult to sort of pin down what it means to be conscious. However, I could give you a general description, and I would say it's your moment to moment awareness of yourself and the environment that you're in, and more importantly, how you feel about that environment. So it includes, but may not be limited to, memories that pop into your head while you're looking at something, sensory experiences that you feel, like maybe how the bright lights or the loud noise, or what you're smelling or what you're touching. It also includes a bit of introspection, and by introspection, I mean you evaluating the things that you're feeling and the memories that you're having. And we can also say that consciousness has a characteristic called intentionality. That is to say, you direct your consciousness in what you choose to pay attention to. So, although I can't really define consciousness, I will say that it's composed of your memories, your sensory experiences, your perceptions and evaluations of these sensory experiences, and also your intentionality to direct yourself throughout your environment. Now, there are different areas in which psychologists have attempted to sort of move the study of consciousness forward. So some people are interested in the question of subjectivity versus objectivity. Is there such a thing as an objective awareness that we all share? Is there an objective awareness, or is everybody's experience unique? That is it phenomenological? So we might ask the question, when you look at the color green, do you experience green the same way I experience the color green? When you bite into a French fry, do you taste the same thing that I taste? So some psychologists have wondered, do we even all have sort of a universal experience that we can talk about, or is everybody's different? If everybody's is different and unique, then it becomes really difficult to study this thing called consciousness. The other question that psychologists ponder is, are there minimum qualities for consciousness? So we typically talk about humans as being the only, quote, conscious animals, but that depends on how you define consciousness. Is human consciousness the only way that you can be conscious? Or could we say that dogs have a sense of consciousness? Do birds have a sense of consciousness? Do earthworms have a sense of consciousness? What does it mean what is the minimum definition for what it means to be conscious? I mean, do trees have consciousness? It's hard to say. So, is there an objective consciousness we can all measure, or is it subjective and phenomenological? What exactly are the minimum qualities that make somebody, quote, conscious, right? And here's the hardest question, this idea of materialism versus dualism. Who controls your consciousness? Typically, when we start talking about ourselves, I did this and I thought this, we're talking about sort of, if you will, this non physical thing that we feel inside our body. But what exactly causes you to lift your arms, to walk, to come to school? What caused you to come to class today? Was it your decision, or was it your body telling you to do that? So, who controls consciousness? Is it you? Or is it your neurons? A lot of people talk about this thing called a soul. Do you have a soul? How many of you believe in the concept of a soul? And that is this non physical entity that resides in you that directs your body. If you believe in a soul directing your body, you are what we might call a dualist, right? On the other hand, reductionists, maybe like myself, would say that, consciousness comes from your neurons. It's not you per se, but it is your neurons that cause your consciousness. So, what exactly does it mean to be aware and have consciousness? Does everybody share the same consciousness? What does it mean to be consciousness? And who controls your consciousness? This soul, this ephemeral soul, or is it controlled by your neurons? Now, ways to think about consciousness. Typically, we talk about conscious versus unconscious awareness. So, okay, very good, cassette. Fantastic. The only problem is when you start believing in a soul, you have to answer the question, how does a soul, which has no physical properties, move a body which has physical properties? I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the famous philosopher Rene Descartes, but he demonstrated, at least in his mind, the proof of a soul by saying, I think, therefore I am. He said, you know what? If you start to question your reality, your ability to perceive reality, maybe you don't see reality as it really is. Maybe you're limited in your perceptive abilities. But the fact that you are thinking, you know that you exist simply because you are actually thinking at the moment. So, what do we know about consciousness? I don't know. It's hard to say. Now, ways to compare conscious. You can talk about conscious versus unconscious awareness. And this semester, we're going to talk about those abilities that we control and are aware of. And we're also going to talk about those motivations that we have that lie underneath our conscious awareness. And psychologists also studied altered states of consciousness. So we're going to talk about hypnosis. We're going to talk about meditation. You can talk about if changing your level of consciousness by using drugs. And we can even talk about, we're going to talk about flow, which is another form of consciousness. Okay, so it's a sort of a weird nebulous characteristic. I don't believe in us. I believe we operate more like computers. Right. So, Eli, if you say that, you would be more of a materialist, if you will. So the question is, are we directed by our neurons and our biological matter, or are we directed by this thing that resides over and above our physical body? Ooh, that's an interesting way to put it. I believe the soul can create the emotions and choices I make. That's a very interesting statement, Cosette. I like that. Very good. Very good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this thing called consciousness. Oh, by the way, I want to stop and suggest to you that I have got a great video on consciousness this week. It's in the course resources folder for this week, and it's also in the optional webinar folder. And you really should look at Anil Seth's talk on the nature of consciousness. He provides some really cool information about the latest research into states of consciousness. Okay, now, one way to think about consciousness is now, I don't know if any of you have ever had this experience. You're sitting here probably listening to me right now, but you're not totally focused on me. You're probably looking down at your phone. You're probably talking to a friend that's in your room right now. You may be reading a book, watching television. Have you ever noticed how your consciousness bounces around from moment to moment and it's super hard to focus on any one thing? In fact, some of you probably even say you probably have attention problems. Boy, I just can't pay attention. I must have a problem. That is actually not the truth. Human beings' attention bounces around from moment to moment to moment so that we can stay aware of um, our entire environment, because our ability to pay attention is rather limited to one thing. So we have to bounce around from moment to moment. And you folks have probably noticed that your consciousness bounces around from moment to moment. Oh, my shirt. Oh, my video. Oh, Roddenberry's talking. And then back again to other things. So your consciousness is constantly shifting. And that's one of the things that makes it tough to measure. Now, um, uh, uh, Tong and whatnot suggested that we can think of consciousness biologically. Some people believe in having a split, then there's the agreement of what's the difference between spirit or soul. Another good point. And that's the hard thing. I'm not here to say that we don't have a soul. But I am going to say that the idea of a soul is beyond the science of psychology, because remember, as a scientist, we have to measure things. And right now, nobody knows exactly how one would, quote, measure a soul. So whether it exists or doesn't exist is something that is actually beyond psychology at this point. Okay. Now, some people say, what exactly is consciousness? In the global workspace model, says that you can think of consciousness as different parts of your brain being active at any given second. If you remember last week, I talked about brain modularity and that we have different parts of our brain that are responsible for different specific behaviors. Well, you can think about consciousness in the global workspace model as being whatever part of your brain is active at that given moment. So if your visual cortex is active, your consciousness is primarily visual. If you hear something and it captures your attention, then your auditory cortex becomes active and your consciousness shifts to what you're hearing. So consciousness may be what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're thinking. And in the global workspace model, they suggest that that happens to be the part of your brain that is active at any given second. And this activity can shift from parts of your brain to other parts from moment to moment. Now, the test with the global workspace model goes like this. If you look at that picture over on the far left, okay, you'll see that going from bottom to top, we have a picture of a house, we have a picture of a man's face, and then we have a superimposed picture that includes the face and the house, right? So in Tong's study in 1998, what they did was they had people look at the house and they used the PET scan to see exactly what part of their brain was active while they were looking at the house. All right. They then had the person look at the picture of the man and they measured what part of the brain was active when they were looking at the picture of the man. They then show people the superimposed picture and ask them to report what they see. And what they found was that some people reported in the superimposed picture, some people saw the house and some people saw the face. But the neat thing is that people's report of what they saw correlated with what part of their brain was active. So, in the first part of the study, I found that your brain was active when you were looking at the house. This part of your brain was active. If I asked you to look at the superimposed picture and you said you reported the house as what you saw in the superimposed picture, it turns out that the part of your brain that had mapped to the house would be the one that was active at that given moment. So this is sort of support for the notion that your consciousness is directed by whatever part of your brain happens to be active in any given time. Yes, Sarah King asked the question, would the voice in your head be consciousness? Absolutely. If you remember, my definition of consciousness was it had a quality called introspection. That's you evaluating your sensory experiences, your memories, and how they make you feel. So the voice in your head is a part of your consciousness. And you can think of people who are schizophrenic, maybe don't have the ability to tell that voice in their head from the voices of real people in their world. So if you think about it, when you're doing stuff all day long, things are going through your head where you're evaluating yourself. Boy, I'm doing this poorly. Well, wow, I'm doing this great. If you think about it, the voices in your head are part of your consciousness. And people with schizophrenia maybe can't disentangle between the voice in their head and the voice in the real world. Some people say they don't have a little voice. What does that mean? Well, again, let's go. If we go back to that one chart, um, we asked the question subjectivity versus objectivity. Everybody's consciousness is different to a certain extent, this idea of phenomenology. So maybe your consciousness, Sarah, includes a running narrative in your head. Maybe for someone like me, my brain doesn't tend towards that kind of cognitive activity, so I don't experience the little voice in my head. So the weird thing is, consciousness is whatever's going on in your brain. So just because you don't have the little voice doesn't mean you're not necessarily consciousness. It just means your consciousness tends towards another pattern of activity. That is pretty interesting. And then you can think of people on the other side, Cosette, those people whose voices in their head is so strong that it breaks into their reality and they think that the voice is really there. Okay? So that's sort of the global workspace model. And I want you to understand that consciousness is kind of shifting and it's different for everybody, but it seems to be directed by the part of the localized part of your brain that happens to be active at any given time. Okay, now, one of the things that I talked about last week was this idea of the contralateral design of the brain. So you can divide your body into a left half and a right half, and the left half of your brain controls the right half of your body, and the left half of your brain controls the right half of your body. Here's the deal. You have a consciousness too. Look around you right now. You're seeing the world around you. You can draw a line down the middle of your field of vision, and you can divide your vision into a left side and a right side. Psychologists call these hemifields. So if I'm looking at the picture screen that makes up my reality, I have a left hemifield and I have a right hemifield. And this is just the picture that I'm looking at right now. The crazy thing is, the left part of your brain sees the right and is conscious of the right side of your body, and your right brain sees and is conscious of the left side of your body. So even your consciousness is divided into a left half and a right half, if you will. Now, uh, you don't experience this split world. You experience a unified world, and that's because you have this brain structure called a corpus callosum that I introduced last week. You'll see a picture way over here on the left. It is the band of axons, myelinated axons, that connect the left half of your brain and the right half of the brain. And what they do is they sew your consciousness together like stitching, so that you experience one unified consciousness. But keep in mind that your right brain is perceiving the left world and your left brain is perceiving the right world. Now, nifty experiment that they do with some people to demonstrate this divided nature of consciousness. There's a surgery called a commissurotomy where they cut your corpus callosum in half. It's only done for people who have severe seizures that can't be fixed through medicine. And it's not done often. Well, they do it a little different now, so it doesn't cause what I'm getting ready to talk about. But in the early days, back in the 60s, they would cut the whole corpus callosum. Now, if you're just walking around, you can't even tell that your brain has had surgery if you cut the corpus callosum because I'm walking around looking. But if you put this person in a special experimental situation, you will find that their consciousness is actually divided. So if you look at the picture underneath me, you'll notice that this person is sitting at a table and they're looking at a computer screen. There's a black dot in the middle and they're told to focus on that black dot. And if they focus on that black dot, that house that's on the left side of their field of vision goes to the right side of their brain. And that chicken's foot, I guess that's what that is, that's on the right side of their field of vision, goes to the left side of their brain. All right. Now, if you ask this person questions about what they're looking at, they will give you very bizarre and different answers. Now, remember from last week, I said that your left side of your brain is verbal, it can talk. So, when the right side of your brain sees something, in order for you to name what it is you're seeing, that information has to travel from the right side of your brain through your corpus callosum to the left side of your brain. Now, if you split the corpus callosum, that can't happen. So, if you ask this gentleman right here, uh, if he sees the house is on the left field of vision, so that goes to his right brain, and his right brain is not verbal. So if you ask this gentleman if he sees the house, he's going to say no. He's going to say no because that part of his brain can't talk. On the other hand, if you ask him what he sees, he's probably going to report that he sees a chicken's foot. And what this demonstrates is that our consciousness, remember I suggested the global workspace model? You can think of our consciousness as being divided into a left side and a right side as well. So consciousness is clearly divided. It's controlled by different parts of our brain, different localized area, and the left side of our brain is conscious of our right side of our world, and the right side of our brain is conscious of the left side of our world. Now, there's actually and I may have the video. I have a video of someone, a split brain patient, in the course resources folder for this week. You should go look at that. But I think I also have a video of somebody with hemi neglect. And the crazy thing is, there are some people who have strokes, and it's primarily to the right side of their brain, in their parietal lobe. When these people have brain damage to their parietal lobe, they will actually quit paying attention to the left side of their world. And if you ask them to draw a house, they'll only draw the left side, the right side of the doors and the windows, and they'll leave the other half completely blank. I'm going to show you that video in class tonight, but there are some people who have damage to the right hemisphere of their right parietal lobe in their right hemisphere, and these people actually lose the ability to be aware of the left side of their visual world, right? And there are some people who have damage to their conscious visual pathway, and these people can't report seeing things, but they can pick these things up that they can't even see. This is called blind sight. So some people, if you ask them, "Hey, do you see that car right there?" The person will say, "No, I can't see it." But you'll say, "You know what? Point to that car." And even though the person can't see it, they can point to where it is in their environment. And that's because their visual consciousness is split up into what you're aware of and what you're not aware of. I heard that if one of your eyes gets damaged, sometimes the opposite eye will experience symptoms as well because your brain confuses which eye is which. You know what? I haven't heard that, Logan, but I could definitely see that happening. That sounds like a very reasonable statement. Good point, Logan. Thank you. If you actually can find an article on that, I would appreciate you sending that to me. Tonight in class, I'm going to show you a blind sight person. I'm going to show you somebody with hemi neglect, and I may even show you the split brain experiment. So we're going to talk about all these different bizarre ways in which people's consciousness is limited. Nearsighted means you can't see things that are far away very well, but you know they're there. In blind sight, you actually say they don't exist, right? So if I asked you, what do you see right there? You would say, I don't see anything. But then I would give you an option of four pictures, and I would say, pick the object that goes with the thing you can't see. And if there was a chicken there, you'd be able to pick out an egg. So the deal is, you know what you're looking at, but your brain can't consciously bring that into your awareness. Good question, Gloria. Good question. All right. The weird thing is, human beings are what we would call cognitive misers. You have very little. One of the things that we know about consciousness is that it is very limited. If you've ever been in class trying to pay attention, you'll notice that it's hard to multitask and really get things right. We have very limited ability to pay attention. There's only a small set of things you can really, really focus on. And the term that is sometimes used to describe people's limited ability to pay attention is that we are cognitive misers. And think about how many things you do during the day without paying attention to them. You may go get yourself a drink of water and hardly pay attention to the fact that you're getting the glass and going over to the sink and filling it up. When you dial a phone, do you really think about the numbers that you're dialing? How many of you have been driving down the road changing the channel on your radio without really paying attention to what you're doing? Human beings spend a lot of time making things, if you will, automatic and not thinking about them. So we are, in fact, cognitive misers, and we save what little attention we have for the novel things that are in our environment. Now, why is this important? Well, you can demonstrate that people miss incredibly obvious things because they are not paying attention to the details. Look over here at this picture right now. You'll see this. This is called a change blindness study, the picture over on the far left corner. What they do in this experiment is they have a guy come up and ask directions. You see this fellow in the first picture. He's holding some paper and he's asking a stranger for directions. And in this experiment, they set it up so that as he's asking questions, two guys come through carrying a big board, like a piece of plywood. And they do this really quick change so that when the board passes between these two, they switch the guys out. And you'll notice we go from the guy in the brown jacket to the guy in the green jacket. And the question in this experiment is, will that white-haired old man know that the person who's talking to him has changed to a different person? And what psychologists have found is that about 50% of the time, most people do not notice that the person they are talking to has changed in the middle of a conversation. These people are blind to the change that occurs in their environment. And so we can actually show that most people don't even pay attention to some of the more important and salient things in their environment. He should notice that this fellow's wearing a brown jacket and that the brown switches to a green jacket, but he doesn't. He's blind to that. And I've got another video that I'm going to show you later tonight to demonstrate inattentional blindness. But if I tell you to pay attention to something, you will ignore other stuff on purpose. And this is called inattentional blindness. And what we do is we give you a selective attention task. Hey, I want you to pay attention to the people wearing white shirts. And if I have a group of people wearing white and black shirts, the people in black shirts can actually do things and you won't notice because you've been directed not to pay attention to them. And we call this inattentional blindness. And what this means is we have this little bit of conscious awareness that we can really, really focus on. And human beings are good at making a lot of our thoughts and our behaviors unconscious. And you can actually fool somebody's consciousness. We're going to show you, I've got two videos that I'm going to show you tonight that will absolutely blow your mind. I do hope you come to the webinar. Okay, I do hope you come to the webinar because I've got some cool videos to show you. All right, now let's talk about different types of consciousness. So, do any of you meditate? Have any of you ever meditated? I started meditating about 5 years ago. I go to this hippie summer camp up in New York during the summer, and I meditate for a month. I do it because I'm such an anxious, neurotic person that I need to calm myself down. Okay. What if man was just old and didn't pick up on me as well as someone young? Right. That's the thing, Cosette. They're more likely to notice the change if it goes from male to female and if it goes from young to old. But even then, sometimes people still miss the change. Sometimes people still miss the change. That's a great question, Cosette. Um, okay, so Jade meditates, Gloria meditates. Wow, Sandra, you deep breathing. That's meditation in a way, right? And so the idea behind meditation is that you are trying to learn how to yoke and control the mind. If you've ever noticed that when you sit around alone and nobody's there talking to you, your mind bounces around. And most of the time it bounces around to things that make you sad. We ruminate. That's what it's called when you're just thinking in your minds, thinking about different things. You are ruminating, and it turns out that rumination is negative a lot of time and makes us sad and stressed out. Meditation is a practice where one tries to control the direction of their consciousness. It's an Some people say it's an altered state of consciousness, and it's the practice of learning how to control one's attention. And typically, what you do, and Gloria, Jade, Sandra, if I say anything that doesn't jive with what you're doing, feel free to speak up. But in the meditation that I've done, what you do is they'll give you something, a sound, an object, maybe the end of your nose, a flame, if you will, and your job is to focus on that thing. And what you'll find is that every couple of minutes, your mind will shift away from what you're supposed to be focusing on. And what you're supposed to do is not feel bad about that, but shift your attention back to what you're supposed to be paying attention to. And for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, you learn how to control your attention and keep it on one object. Maybe in transcendental meditation, you let thoughts come into your head and then you let them leave. There's a loving kindness meditation where you meditate on people that you like or don't like and have happy thoughts. But the idea is that you are controlling your attention and not letting it bounce all over the place. And meditation sounds familiar. Okay, there you go. Sandra's giving me a little validation here. So the deal with meditation is that the rumination that we engage in a lot of times is negative. And when we think about negative things, it activates our emotional system, which causes us to experience the physiological experience of stress. And stress is not good for the human body. So, by learning to meditate, by learning to control our rumination, we can decrease the amount of sadness and stress that we feel across the day. And so, here on this PowerPoint, I'll suggest to you that regular meditation is associated with improvement in stress related health measures. Your blood pressure, your cholesterol level, your glucose levels, all things that are related to the stress response will improve. People decrease the psychological experience of stress, the negative emotions that go away with that stress, and even their sad feelings are lessened. Okay, now looking at this picture underneath me, this is a PET scan, or actually a functional MRI. And what you see highlighted here is this thing called the default mode network. I'm going to give you the biological reason for why stress works. It turns out that all of your brain has jobs, but some of your brain do jobs at different times. Like I said, localization of function. It turns out that there is a circuit in your brain, a set of brain modules that activate when you're not doing anything. When you're just sitting there with no task in front of you, this part of your brain we call the default mode network, the DMN, becomes active. It's sometimes called the task negative network. It's the part of your brain that's active when you don't have something to do, when you're just sitting there thinking about things. And when the default mode network is activated, most people will report thinking about themselves, thinking about their past, thinking about others, and they typically report that their thoughts are quite negative and they feel sad about them. It turns out that people who regularly meditate experience decreased activity in their default mode network. And so this is sort of biological explanation for how stress can actually help you. Do people who meditate, are they less likely to experience change blindness? No, not necessarily. You're asking the question, are they in the moment better and paying attention? Um, no, I would say probably not, because we still have that cognitive shortcut that we use to help us focus on the things that are important. Just because you meditate doesn't mean you've expanded your ability to pay attention per se. Okay, you've just learned how to control where your mind goes. That's a great question, Brian. Very good question. Meditation. Now, another form of consciousness that's a little more controversial is what we call hypnosis. Have any of you ever been hypnotized before? I was hypnotized in eighth grade at science camp, and that's actually why I decided to become a psychologist, because it was such a crazy experience. This guy kind of walked back and forth and talked to me for a while and waved his hand, and after a while, I fell into a state of hypnosis. And the cool thing was, he had me put my hands together and told me they were in a vice, and then said, I bet you can't pull them apart. And I found that I couldn't get my hands apart because there was this imaginary vice on them. And this guy led me into a state where I was highly suggestible. Some people suggest that hypnosis is an alternate state of consciousness in which a person is highly suggestible, highly open to suggestion for another person, and that this person will experience changes in their memory and their perception. Okay, Logan, you don't want anybody to control you. Fantastic. Now, but there are people who can become hypnotized, and some people who are less hypnotizable, but there are people who are hypnotized. And when these people become hypnotized, you can really make them do odd and funny things and have very odd experiences while they're under hypnosis. Now, you're going to see a lot of people maybe going to hypnosis so they can quit problem behaviors. Maybe they want to stop overeating. Maybe they want to stop drinking or smoking cigarettes. The research suggests that post hypnotic suggestions, that is, suggestions that are given to you under hypnosis, don't tend to translate into conscious awareness. So when you are hypnotized, you may not want a cigarette, but as soon as you come down from hypnosis, it turns out that being hypnotized and told that you don't want cigarettes, it doesn't really work once you come out of being hypnotized. And that's why some people say it may not be dreaming. That's a great question. Lucid dreaming, dreaming in general, is a state of consciousness. What I'm going to argue tomorrow, Gloria, is that when you're asleep and dreaming, you are conscious. It's just a different form of consciousness. So your consciousness changes throughout the day. Meditation is one way to change it, but sleep is a way that we all change our consciousness every day. So I would say we are often in a state of hypnosis. Based on the specific definition of what hypnosis is, no, but I would say that a lot of us sleepwalk through our day or let unconscious motivations drive us, and we lose, in a sense, our free will concept. So I wouldn't say we're hypnotized, but I would say that we are sometimes under the control of forces that are not a part of our conscious awareness. Is this true? I would like to, whatever movie that is, Logan, send that to me, okay? Now, uh, the cool thing is, some people, they use hypnosis, behavioral psychologists use hypnosis to maybe cure problematic behaviors, but the data suggests that doesn't work. Other health psychologists use hypnosis as a way of treating. Pain. We call that hypnotic analgesia. And you know what? It turns out that hypnotic analgesia has been shown to be effective in treating pain. And the crazy thing is that when you measure a person with a PET scan or the fMRI, when you're meditating and telling them that they're not experiencing pain, the brain areas that are responsible for experiencing pain actually become less active. So we know that there's sort of a biological correlate of hypnotic analgesia. Now, the question is hypnosis really a real state of altered consciousness, or are people just playing a game when they get up there and they're hypnotized in a party? Now, there are two theories. Some people argue that they are not. In the social cognitive theory, these people say, you know what, your consciousness doesn't really change when you're hypnotized. Instead, you're placed into a social environment where it's appropriate for you to act like you're hypnotized. So these people, the social cognitive people, say that really you're just playing a role when you are hypnotized and your consciousness really doesn't change. On the other hand, the people from the dissociation theory school of hypnosis say that, you know what, you really do split your consciousness, and your consciousness splits into half, and that part of you experiences a different and altered state of consciousness. So these are sort of two theories. Is it real? Is it not real? I will tell you that there are two camps. In the field of psychology. Some people say it's not real, sociocognitive. Other people say it is a dissociated state of consciousness, and those are the dissociation theory people. When interrogators have a person of interest in a room for hours and they become suggestible, is this a form of hypnotism? Um, I wouldn't say it's an altered state. It probably is more like the social cognitive theory. The person begins to think they need to talk. Although, Brian, when we get to emotions and motivation in chapter 10, I'm going to talk to you about the clues that we accidentally give out when we are lying to people. And investigators, good crime investigators, know how to read these nonverbal signals that we transmit when we are lying. These signals are called nonverbal leakage, and we're going to talk about them in chapter 10 and 11. So save that question, Brian. That's a great, great question. Now, I do want to talk to you about one final state of consciousness, probably my favorite state of consciousness. How many of you like an activity that you really, really like to do? That when you do it, you are so engrossed in that activity that time slips away. Do any of you read and lose track of time? Do any of you have art or play music or get so involved in something that you forget where you are? Has anybody ever had that cool experience where you're so into something that you lose track of time? A famous psychologist, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who is actually dead right now, who died earlier this year, studied this altered state of consciousness he called flow. And Jade Gray experiences flow when they're crafting. Fantastic. Daydreaming is not necessarily a state of flow. A state of flow occurs when you're doing something that you really like to do and you're being challenged. It's not so you're playing a game and it's not too easy and it's not too hard. It's just hard enough so that you're challenged and it's something that you really, really like. And it's called, yeah, hyperfocus. That's another way to refer to it. The term that we use in psychology would be called flow, but that's hyperfocus, yes. Art. Amin does art, painting, absolutely. Now, this guy, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, was very interested in this flow state because he said this is when people are happiest and when people are most productive. So in his idea, we ought to spend as much time as possible trying to get ourselves into states of flow. What exactly did he mean by flow? People who are in a state of flow have complete concentration on the task. They're not paying attention to anything else. They merge action and awareness. It almost feels as if their body is acting on its own. I think, and my body just automatically does perfectly what I want. These people will often lose time. Most of us keep track of how long this lecture is being going on, and you're like, wow, will this lecture ever be over? Will this lecture ever be over? If you're in a state of flow, you don't think about that. You just lose track of time. And the cool part is when you're really in flow, you your sense of anxiety about your performance. You're not thinking about whether you're doing well or not. You lose a sense of self focus. And in fact, one of the things that professional athletes and their psychological trainers do is they try to train their athletes to lose this sense of self awareness. Because when you're thinking about yourself, the anxiety often overwhelms your ability to perform. So, in a state of flow, you've lost your self awareness. And people report having fun, whatever it is. It's art or knitting that Anya does, or Jade does crafting. It's fun. It's so much fun, and you get this feeling as if you know how to do it perfectly. And so these are sort of the six qualities of the flow experience. And what Csikszentmihalyi found is that people are more likely to experience a sense of flow when they are good at something and they are being challenged at that activity that they are good at. If you're not good at it, it's harder to get into flow. And if you're doing something that is too easy, it's not easy to get into a state of flow. But if you're really good at something and you're being challenged at your optimal level, people are more likely to experience this state of flow. Now, some people find it easier to get into states of flow. And Csikszentmihalyi would call these people the autotelic personality types. So he says some of us have an easier time getting into a state of flow, and other of us don't. So, what are some applications? Montessori education. I talk about that in my developmental class. In this educational setting, the child directs what they're learning and at what level they're learning at. So instead of the teacher telling you what you're going to study, you study what's engaging to you at that moment and you study it at the highest level you possibly can. So, Montessori education trains people into a state of flow. Okay. If you've ever been in sports, and you are, quote, in the zone. If any of you have ever played a sport where you just can't seem to get anything wrong and it just happens automatically, you are in the zone. And sometimes you'll hear musicians who are grooving together and doing a really good job. They'll talk about getting in the pocket. But in the pocket, in the zone, engaged in school, these are all just examples of when people find states of flow. So these are three different ways we experience changes in our consciousness: meditation, hypnosis, and this state of consciousness we call flow. Remember, you can't really define consciousness, but we know that it does have characteristics. It includes memories, it includes your sensory experiences, it includes your evaluations, it includes an intention. But we can direct this into different sort of states, if you will, and change our level of productivity and our level of happiness. Now, on Thursday, I'm going to talk about an important change in consciousness that we experience every day, and that's called the sleep cycle. And in sleep, we change our consciousness. We don't lose consciousness when we sleep. Our consciousness changes. Keep that in mind. Sleep is not a loss of consciousness, it's a change in consciousness. And we're going to talk about that on Thursday. Would hypnosis for pain treat the actual source or just tell the brain that there is no pain? The weird thing is, pain is in the source, but it's also in the brain. So the weird thing about pain is it's a conscious sensory perception. People with phantom limb pain feel pain in an organ they don't even have. So if you think about it, Sarah, pain is in the mind. And so hypnosis just changes the mind's response to the signals that are coming up from the part of the body that is hurt. Remember, pain is in the mind. It's not in your leg that appears to be hurting, but it's in your brain that is processing that sensory information. Right. Isn't this why people say not to watch the clock when you're waiting on something and instead distract yourself? Yes, if you can find a state of flow, Gloria, what you're going to find is that time passes quickly. If you're watching the clock, if you have one of those jobs that's not engaging and you watch the clock, time goes very, very slowly. But if you're being challenged and interested in what you're doing, time at work passes super, super duper quickly. Okay, does anybody have any questions about today's lecture on consciousness? I want to thank everybody for coming. We've got 22 people in the class right now. We had upwards of 24, so in my mind, that is great attendance on today's lecture. Anybody have any questions? I notice we've got that that Russian person coming in trying to troll our meeting, so I'm going to go ahead and hide them. Goodbye, person. You are gone. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? I play and felt that I've never really experienced flow. Uh, you know, read about flow in the textbook, Logan, and maybe you'll see what I'm talking about. That's a good question. Let's see. Psychology session, it's an interesting topic. Thank you for the good lecture. Well, I'm glad you liked it. All right, folks, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me a text or an email. Otherwise, I hope to see you this evening. I've got some great videos demonstrating different forms of consciousness, and we're going to talk a little bit about flow and getting in the zone tonight. Okay? Uh, flow is flow is a type of dissociation. Yes, I would say you're dissociated from your self-awareness. So if you remember when I talked about those four qualities of flow, it was your sensory experiences, it was your intentionality, it was your memory, and it was your self-awareness. I would say when you're in a sense of flow, your consciousness loses that self-awareness, and you become intensely focused on that thing that is of interest. That's a great question, Amy. All right, folks, you have a great day. I look forward to seeing you tonight at 8 p.m. Take care. Bye bye.